Welcome back to HistoryCrafts. Today we are going to talk about a man who helped design the rockets that rained down on London in World War II. He then helped launch the rockets that would carry America into the orbit. And his name is barely known today, but his fingerprints are both on the darkest and most ambitious parts of human engineering.
Majority of the rocket systems developed for military use have completed their research and development phase and are ready for their deployment and intended use.
This is the story of Kurt Heinrich de Boos, the Nazi electrical engineer. Kurt was born on the 29th of November in 1908 in Frankfurt, Germany. He studied electrical engineering at the Technical University of Darmstadt, earning his doctorate in 1939 with a thesis on high voltage impulse discharges, a field critical to advanced weapon systems, particularly rocketry and radar. And as we all know, in 1939, World War II also started. As Hitler's war machine expanded, so did its need for technical talent, and de Boos' academic success caught the eye of the Army Weapons Office, and in 1940 he was assigned to Peenemünde, where the future of warfare was being built in secret. If you don't know about Peenemünde, I suggest you to look it up. Otherwise, I can also make a video about this another time. In Peenemünde, de Boos worked directly under Werner von Braun, who was leading development of the Aggregat series of rockets, particularly the A4, which became the infamous V2, Vergeltungswaffe. While von Braun focused on propulsion and airframe design, de Boos managed the electrical system, launch control, and the entire countdown sequencing apparatus, effectively serving as the project's chief launch engineer. The V2, short for Vergeltungswaffe 2 or Retribution Weapon 2, became the world's first ballistic missile. It could travel at over 5,000 kilometers an hour and strike targets without a warning. It represented a new kind of psychological warfare. London and Antwerp were among its primary targets. But behind every technological leap, there was also horror. The V2 killed over 9,000 civilians through direct strikes, and over 20,000 slave laborers died building it in underground tunnels at Mittelbau-Dora. These prisoners, many from concentration camps, worked in nightmarish conditions without sunlight, food or medicine. While de Boos was not stationed at Dora, he frequently visited testing sites and launch ranges. As head of launch control, he was deeply embedded in the logistical chain that relied on these rockets, and by extension the labor behind them. He already joined the Nazi Party or NSDAP in 1933, and by the 1940s was listed as an SS member, though the full extent of his ideological alignment remains still debated to this day. He also worked closely with other scientists who would become both collaborators and, eventually, co-emigrants. Walter Dornberger, for example, was a general and in charge of the V2 program. Arthur Rudolph was the director of production. He was later tried for war crimes. Helmut Gröttrup was a telemetry expert and was later sent to the Soviet Union. The V2 rocket wasn't just innovation, it was also devastation. Precision engineering served the regime built on terror. After Germany's surrender in 1945, the US scrambled to secure German scientific talent before the Soviets could. And this is quite interesting, because this led to Operation Paperclip, a covert program that brought over 1,600 former Nazis and military specialists to America. If you want, I can do a more in-depth video about Operation Paperclip, but I'm just gonna give you small context right here. Kurt de Boos was also on that list. His technical background, quiet demeanor, and deep knowledge of launch logistics made him an asset, not just in theory, but in the very infrastructure the US was desperate to build. He and von Braun's team, Werner von Braun also, came over with Operation Paperclip, were initially transferred to Fort Bliss in Texas, where they trained American soldiers using disassembled V-2 rockets captured from Germany. These early demonstrations laid the groundwork for the United States Army's first experiments in long-range missiles. But it was the move to the Redstone Arsenal in Huntsville, Alabama, that marked the real beginning of America's rocket age. Here, DeBooz helped standardize launch procedures, design test stands, and supervise static firings that mimicked Peenemünde's operational rigor. There he worked with people like Ernst Stuhlinger, whose ion propulsion concept would later influence future deep space probes, or Kraft Erike, a visionary who believed humanity's destiny lay in colonizing the solar system, or even with Konrad Dannenberg, who would transition from German rocket stages to Saturn V engines. Privately, DeBooz remained methodical and reserved, but his impact was undeniable. He introduced German-style precision to the American test sites, transforming improvised launch zones into permanent facilities. His diagrams, systems, and control protocols became blueprints for future launch infrastructure. And like many other scientists under the Operation Paperclip, DeBooz's Nazi affiliations were reclassified, downplayed, or omitted. His past became a sealed file, his future a new badge and a new flag. Which is crazy if you think about that, right? When NASA was established in 1958, the United States was desperate to catch up with the Soviet Union's early space success. The launch of Sputnik had shocked the world and the American pride. DeBooz, with nearly 2 decades of launch experience, became a cornerstone of the effort.
Dr. Kurt H. Debus, the father of NASA's Kennedy Space Center, was born in Frankfurt, Germany in 1908. His education and rocketry experience landed him in the post-World War II ballistic missile development program in the U.S.
And by 1962, he was appointed the first director of NASA's Launch Operations Center.
On July 1, 1962, the Florida Launch Facility at Cape Canaveral was officially designated as NASA's Launch Operations Center, and Debus was named its first center director. The following year, the center was renamed to honor President John F. Kennedy just after his assassination.
You gotta let that sink in, right? I mean, this guy built the V-2 rocket and then he became, the first director of the Kennedy Space Center?
This is Launch Complex 34 at Cape Canaveral, Florida. The size and complexity of the launch facilities for the National Aeronautics and Space Administration space program can best be explained by the man responsible for their design, construction, and operation, Dr. Kurt H. Debus, Director of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, Launch Operations Center at Cape Canaveral, Florida.
At Cape Canaveral, Debus transformed the landscape. He oversaw the construction of Launch Complex 39, including Pads A and B, the crawler transporter, and the towering vehicle assembly building. Then, the largest single-story building in the world. These weren't just structures. They were launch cathedrals, designed to handle the most powerful rocket ever built, the Saturn V. Debus's role went far beyond engineering. He coordinated across contractors, NASA branches, and the United States military. He enforced timelines, approved budgets, and mediated disputes between departments. His leadership style was demanding but controlled. A throwback to his military training, but repurposed for a new mission. And from Mercury to Gemini and through every stage of Apollo, Debus remained the man behind the curtain. He conducted countdown simulations, reviewed fault tolerances, and ensured that when astronauts said goodbye to Earth, their launch would be seamless. On July 16, 1969, when Apollo 11 launched, it was Debus who gave the go. It was his infrastructure, his timing and his system. And though history remembered the names of the astronauts, it was Debus who had built the path beneath them. The man who once built rockets for Adolf Hitler became the guy who gave the go for the Americans to launch Apollo 11 to the moon.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Debus retired in 1974 after over 3 decades in rocketry. He received the NASA Distinguished Services Medal and was honored as a key architect of the Apollo program. His name is still engraved at the Kennedy Space Center, where the visitor complex and several plaques commemorate his contributions. Kurt Heinrich Debus died in 1983 in Cocoa Beach, Florida. In the 1990s and 2000s, researchers re-examined the records of Operation Paperclip, uncovering not just technical resumes, but the moral compromises the US government had made. While Werner von Braun often took the spotlight, Debus' past drew attention too. He had signed orders, he had held rank. He had operated with a system fueled by ideological loyalty and industrial cruelty. Unlike some of his colleagues, Debus also never gave public testimony, nor addressed his SS records. No memoirs, no interviews. And historians remain divided. Was he a loyal Nazi who turned just an opportunist? Was he a brilliant mind and, was just caught up in the horrors in between? Or was he just a man, who flowed with the tide, which was war at that point? His defenders point to his post-war behavior. Professional, apolitical, focused entirely on his engineering. His critics ask, how do you build rockets over corpses? There's always 2 sides to the coin, right? In broader public memory, Debus is mostly invisible. School children know the moon landing, they know about Lance Armstrong.
I don't think I've ever seen in the Tour de France, because Armstrong is toying with the top names of the cycling world.
When it comes to the doping, would you do it again?
If I was racing in 2015, no. If you take me back to 1995, completely and totally pervasive, I'd probably do it again.
I mean, I knew about Operation Paperclip a few years ago, but Kurt Debus kind of got my attention just a few weeks ago, and I was like, okay, damn, I have to make a video about this guy. And I hope you also learned something new with this topic, because I definitely did. And like I said before, if you want to hear more about Operation Paperclip and all the scientists and things that happened back then, let me know in the comments. Also, leave a like, subscribe if you haven't already, if you want to see more historical videos or interesting topics from our history. Leave a comment for the algorithm, leave a like, and I see you next time. As always, this is HistoryCrafts, where history crafts itself.